Let me ask you something. When you walk through a hospital and a doctor looks at a patient and says stage 4, everyone in that room goes quiet because stage 4 doesn't mean the end is here. It means the end is no longer theoretical. It means the pattern has locked in. The body is still moving, still breathing, still insisting it's fine, but the diagnosis is already written. Now, I want you to hold that image because what I'm about to describe to you is not a political opinion. It is a medical diagnosis applied to the largest empire the world has ever seen, and the symptoms are no longer subtle. Every empire in history has died the same way. Not because historians are romantics who like neat narratives, but because the structural forces that build empires are the same structural forces that eventually destroy them. Rome didn't collapse because of one bad emperor. The British Empire didn't dissolve because of one bad decision in one bad decade. They collapsed because empires by their very nature contain the seeds of their own destruction. Overextension, hubris, financial hollowing, military desperation, and the final fatal stage. The stage where the empire can no longer tell the difference between strength and violence, that is stage 4, and that is exactly where America is right now. Let's go back to the beginning because if you want to understand where something is going, you need to understand where it came from and how it traveled. After World War II, the world was in ruins. Europe was rubble, Japan was ash. China was in the middle of a civil war, and America emerged from that conflict not just victorious, but structurally dominant in a way that no empire in the history of human civilization had ever been. It controlled the seas, it controlled the air, it controlled the global financial system through the dollar. It controlled the narrative through Hollywood, through universities, through the language of international law and human rights. Language that it wrote for its own benefit and then exported to the world as universal truth. This was the American empire at stage 1. Expansion, confidence, genuine goodwill. For a time, the world celebrated. And honestly, if you were in Europe, if you were in East Asia, if you were in the Western sphere, that period was extraordinary. Real growth, real prosperity, real stability. America made the rules, and the rules were good enough that most people went along with them. Stage 2 is when the contradictions begin. This is when the empire starts to notice that maintaining global dominance is expensive, ruinously expensive. You are sending your young men and women to die in countries that most Americans cannot locate on a map. You are propping up regimes that are corrupt, brutal, and deeply unpopular with their own people, because those regimes are useful to your empire. You are printing money to fund wars that produce no strategic gain. Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, 20 years, trillions of dollars, and what did America get? Nothing. Less than nothing because every failed war doesn't just cost money, it costs credibility. And credibility, once lost, is the one thing an empire cannot buy back. This is stage 2. The contradictions deepen. The costs mount. And the leadership class, that small, insular, cozy club of people who went to the same schools, summer in the same places, and make decisions at Davos for the rest of humanity, that class begins to lose touch with the reality on the ground. They maintain the illusion of multilateral consensus. They talk about the rules-based international order, but everyone outside that room already knows it's a fiction. The rules only apply to the countries that cannot fight back. Stage 3 is desperation masquerading as strength. This is perhaps the most dangerous stage because it looks on the surface like confidence. The empire is still throwing punches. It's still deploying carrier groups. It's still imposing sanctions. It's still threatening, bullying, maneuvering. But if you look carefully, and you have to look carefully because the empire controls the media and the narrative, you will see that none of these punches are landing. The sanctions don't work the way they used to because China and Russia and Iran and the Gulf states and the global south are building alternative systems, alternative payment rails, alternative trade routes, alternative reserve assets. Gold is surging. The petrodollar, that brilliant architecture Kissinger built in the 1970s after Nixon closed the gold window, is being quietly dismantled. Not through revolution, but through patient structural substitution. The world is not fighting America directly. It is routing around America. And an empire that can be routed around is an empire that has already begun to die. But the most revealing symptom of stage 3 is not economic. It's psychological. It's hubris. Hubris is the defining characteristic of an empire in decline. It is the blindness, total, complete, catastrophic blindness to the world as it actually is. It is the absolute, unshakable confidence in your own capacity to impose your will. And it manifests in a very specific way. The refusal to negotiate in good faith. The refusal to treat your opponents as rational actors with legitimate interests. The reduction of every geopolitical problem to a binary choice, submit or be destroyed. And this is where America is right now. Look at the language. Look at the press conferences. Look at the way Washington talks about Iran, about Russia, about China. There is no strategic logic. There is no coherent endgame. There is just the assumption that American power will prevail because American power has always prevailed. That is not strategy. That is religion. And when an empire starts worshipping its own invincibility, it has already lost the capacity for the one thing that keeps empires alive: adaptation. Stage 4 is the terminal stage, and here's what it looks like from the inside. The empire is still functioning. The lights are still on. The stock market still opens every morning. The military is still the largest in the world. But the gap between the performance of strength and the reality of strength has become a chasm. The empire is no longer able to win wars, but it is also no longer able to stop fighting them because stopping means admitting weakness. And admitting weakness would unravel the entire psychological architecture that holds the empire together. So it keeps fighting. It escalates. It lashes out. Not from a position of power, but from a position of fear. The desperate, anxious, terrified fear of an establishment that can feel the ground shifting beneath its feet and has no idea how to stop it. And here is what makes the American case uniquely tragic, because America is not just any empire. It is an empire that was built on genuinely revolutionary ideas. The idea that all men are created equal. The idea that government derives its legitimacy from the consent of the governed. The idea that power should be accountable, that speech should be free, that individuals have rights that no state can take away. These were not cynical ideas. They were sincere. And for a long time, even when America violated them, and it violated them constantly, brutally, those ideas remained a kind of gravitational center. The world believed in them even when America didn't live up to them. That belief was itself a form of power, soft power, the most durable kind. And now that belief is gone, not fading, gone. When the closest ally you have, the country that shares your language, your culture, your history, your border, when the prime minister of that country stands up at the World Economic Forum and describes you publicly as a mafia state, and the world nods in agreement, that is not a diplomatic incident. That is a civilizational verdict. The story has changed, and you cannot force people to believe a story they have already stopped believing. So what comes next? Here is the cold structural reality. China does not want to replace America as the global hegemon. This is the great misunderstanding in Washington. China is not building a Chinese empire in the image of the American empire. China is building a multipolar world where it is respected as a sovereign nation and treated as an equal. That is all China has ever wanted. But America cannot give China that because American hegemony requires subordination, and China refuses to be subordinate. So the confrontation continues. Not because either side wants a war, but because the logic of imperial decline drives escalation even when both parties rationally prefer peace. Europe is the great tragedy of this moment. Europe had a choice. It could have positioned itself as the bridge between the declining American empire and the rising multipolar world. It had the economic weight, the historical relationships, the diplomatic credibility to play that role. Instead, it chose vassalage. It chose to follow Washington into a war in Ukraine that has devastated its own economy, alienated Russia as an energy partner, and produced nothing but prolonged suffering. And now it is watching America threaten to pull the rug out from under the very alliance it sacrificed itself to maintain. Europe is paying the price for having no independent strategy, no independent vision, and no independent will. Russia will win in Ukraine. Not because Russia is morally superior or strategically brilliant, though Putin, whatever you think of him, is the only major world leader operating with anything resembling a coherent grand strategy right now. Russia will win because it has the one thing empires in decline inevitably run out of: patience. Time is not on America's side. Every month this war continues, every barrel of oil diverted, every dollar of debt added, every young American who comes home in a box from a war in the Middle East that no one can explain, all of it accelerates the internal fractures. And those fractures are real. They are not manufactured by foreign adversaries. They are the product of 40 years of deindustrialization, financialization, and the hollowing out of the American middle class while the ruling class built its cozy insular bubble and congratulated itself on its sophistication. This is the geometry of imperial collapse. It is not a single catastrophic moment. It is a long, grinding, painful process of delegitimization of the institutions, of the leadership class, of the narrative itself. And the tragedy is that the people who are paying the price are not the people who made the decisions. They never are. They are the ordinary Americans who trusted that the system would work for them, that their country's strength meant their security, that the empire's victories were their victories. They are finding out painfully, slowly, that the opposite is true. The empire's overreach is their poverty. The empire's wars are their grief. The empire's hubris is their isolation. History is not mysterious. It does not hide its patterns. It lays them out plainly for anyone willing to look without flinching. Rome gave us the template. Britain refined it. And now, in real time, we are watching it play out again with better cameras, faster communication, and a world that is no longer willing to pretend it is happening. The question is not whether the American empire is in terminal decline. The structural evidence is unambiguous. The only question that matters now, is how much destruction the empire takes with it on its way down, and whether the people inside it will find the clarity, the courage, and the humility to choose a different path before the choice is no longer theirs to make.